It's been over 2 decades, and there's not a night that passes where I don't remember the fear of that night. My name is Constance. I was young, wild enough in my spirit to do things on my own. That's what I told Edwin, my husband, when I packed up the Bronco and headed for Ironwood Ridge alone. He said he'd meet me a day later. Work wouldn't let him out early, but I was eager to stake our claim on that old ridge we'd found the summer before. Just a narrow shelf cut into the mountain, ringed by pine and thick fern, with a view over the valley that looked like it hadn't changed in thousands of years. Ironwood Ridge sits deep in the southern Appalachian Trail, near where Tennessee kisses the Carolina border. That stretch is older than most folks can wrap their heads around, rugged, quiet, and unsettling in the way only places untouched by men can be. I got up there in the afternoon, sweating through my tank top and kicking dust off the trail as I hauled my gear from the Bronco. No cell service, no radio. It took me a solid hour to get the canvas tent up and the fire ring cleared. By the time I sat down with a bottle of water and a bag of trail mix, the sun was already starting to dip, casting long amber fingers through the trees. I remember thinking it was too quiet even then. Normally, the woods up there are alive with sound cicadas, tree frogs, the wind brushing through the canopy. But that day, there was this pressure, like the silence was wrapped too tight around the trees. I shook it off, blaming it on fatigue. Edwin always said I let my imagination get away from me, and maybe he was right. Until it got dark. I lit the lantern I kept clipped to the pole of the tent, an old Coleman thing that hissed faintly when it burned, and started a small fire. The flames helped, but not much. When the lantern began to flicker, I figured I hadn't topped off the fuel. I stood, stretched, and grabbed the flashlight from the tent pocket. My truck was parked down a skinny dirt track about 100 yards back, where the trail widened just enough to turn around. I didn't want to admit I felt nervous walking that trail alone, but I did. I kept the flashlight angled low, watching the uneven dirt and trying not to spook myself. That's when it started. The forest just stopped. No wind. No insects. Just dead, perfect silence. I stopped too. My first thought was that a predator must be nearby, a bear, maybe a cougar. My second thought was that I should go back to camp. But before I could move, I heard the crack. A single branch, snapping under pressure, off to my left, maybe 15 yards into the brush. I froze. Another step, this time in the gravel behind me. Soft. Deliberate. I turned, flashlight sweeping, but the beam caught nothing but trunks and shadows. My heart started to hammer in my chest. I tried to whisper out a hello, but my throat was dry. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a dog. It stepped out of the shadows just far enough to catch the edge of my light. The size of a German Shepherd, maybe bigger, with legs that bent too sharp and a spine that looked wrong, arched and twitching. Its tail was thin, hairless, like a whip. And its head, God, its head was all wrong. Its snout was long, but too wide and flat at the end, like a crocodile's jaws forced onto a canine skull. The eyes were small, close to the top of its head. It stared at me. Didn't move. Didn't blink. Then, behind it, another set of eyes. Higher up, wider apart. Just floating in the black, like they belonged to something taller, broader. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed. It could have been seconds, maybe a minute, but my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. I remember this strange coppery taste rising in the back of my mouth, like I'd bitten my tongue. Then came the sound of a truck. Far off, rumbling up the gravel switchback. It was just some old beater hauling down the ridge road, but in that moment, the beams swept across the path behind me, and in that instant of illumination, I turned to look. Gone, both sets of eyes. The creature with the snout. The taller one in the trees. Nothing. I didn't wait. I sprinted towards my truck. I slammed it into reverse, spun the wheel, and tore down that mountain so fast I nearly flipped twice. Didn't care. Didn't look back. Just drove until the forest was behind me. When I reached the ranger station, I must look like hell sweaty, wild-eyed, shaking. The young man inside tried to be polite, he said. You were just spooked by shadows. I didn't argue. I didn't even have any proof. When Edwin showed up the next day, I told him everything. Edwin never was the type to entertain nonsense. Said I must have let the dark get to me. His mother called me dramatic. I stayed quiet after that. I've replayed it 1,000 times in my head. I swear something was there that night. Something ancient. People mock me, call me crazy. It doesn't matter anymore. It's been over a decade, and I still can't talk about it without my hands shaking. I've told this story maybe 5 times in my life, and every time I do, I feel like I'm pulling something back into the present. But today, something in me needs to let it out. Maybe I'm tired of carrying the fear alone. This happened in 2008, and I will never forget a single detail. My husband, Mark, and I had planned a week-long hiking and camping trip through the Appalachian Mountains. We're from Colorado and used to high elevations and unpredictable terrain, so the Appalachians were more of a change of scenery than a challenge. We wanted disconnect from the city, from stress. Just us, nature, and our dog, Bear, a big German shepherd who never let me out of his sight. We started in North Carolina, then slowly drove deeper into the mountains. The place we'd found online was this tiny, rustic cabin built in the 1960s, several miles off a dirt road. It was remote, no lights for miles, just the way we wanted it. No traffic, no tourists, just silence. The first few days were perfect. We hiked during the day and built fires at night, drank too much whiskey under the stars, and let the stillness of the woods wrap around us. There was something deeply peaceful about that place at first, but that peace didn't last. It was our 4th night. I remember the time exactly, 11:43 p.m. The rain had started a few hours earlier, a soft drizzle that grew into a steady downpour. We'd been inside since dinner, playing cards by lantern light. Bear had curled up near the fireplace, tail occasionally thumping as he dreamed. We were getting ready for bed. I'd just finished brushing my teeth when I heard the first knock. It was faint 3 soft taps, like someone knocking with the pads of their fingers. I froze. Mark was already in bed, reading. I called out, "Did you hear that?" He looked up, puzzled. Hear what? Knock. Knock. This time, louder. Bear lifted his head. His ears perked. I wrapped a towel around my shoulders and walked into the living room. The front door was a solid old thing, with a small diamond-shaped window at the top, too high for me to see through without standing on my toes. I approached it slowly, trying to convince myself it was just a branch blown loose in the wind. But as I got closer, Bear growled. Low, deep, and unbroken. He'd never growled like that. This was different. I crept closer and stood on my toes to peer through the window. 2 children were standing on the porch. A boy and a girl. Maybe 9 or 10. They were soaked hair plastered to their foreheads, clothes clinging. They weren't wearing rain jackets, and their shoes looked like school shoes completely wrong for where we were. And they were just standing there, staring at the door. I couldn't move. My body wouldn't let me. I wasn't scared yet, not exactly just confused. Concerned. I opened my mouth to call for Mark, but then one of them spoke. "Can we come in?" I didn't see her lips move. The girl had spoken, but her mouth hadn't moved. It was like the words "just," and her voice was flat, emotionless, not like a scared child caught in a storm. Mark came up behind me and asked what was going on. I whispered, "There are kids out there." He looked through the window, and I saw his whole posture shift. His hand went to the doorknob, but I grabbed his wrist. "Something's wrong," I said. Then the boy spoke. "We're cold. We need to come inside." Bear lunged at the door, barking furiously. He was snarling, saliva flying from his mouth. His body was rigid, hackles raised, as if something on the other side of that door was trying to kill us. And that's when I saw their eyes. I don't know how I missed it at first. Maybe it was the dark, or the rain, or some part of my mind protecting me from the truth. But I saw them clearly. Their eyes were completely black. No irises. No whites. Just smooth, endless darkness. Like staring into two bottomless pits. I screamed and yanked Mark away from the door. "Do not open it," I shouted. "Look at their eyes." He froze, staring through the glass. I saw his face drain of color. Bear barked louder. Louder than I'd ever heard him. He kept throwing his body against the door, trying to keep them out. I could hear the wood creak under his weight. Then the knocking started again. Harder this time. Knock. Knock. Just patient. I don't know how long we stood there, listening to them knock. But I remember Mark finally pulling me into the bedroom. He locked the door behind us and pushed the dresser in front of it. We sat on the floor, backs to the wall, Bear pressed against me and still growling low in his throat. For hours, we sat there, wide-eyed and silent. Every now and then, the knocking would start again, sometimes soft, sometimes louder. And then, around 3:30 a.m., it stopped. Just stopped. The silence was worse. I wanted to look out the window, but I couldn't make myself move. We didn't sleep. Not a second. When morning finally came, when the sunlight broke through the trees, we slowly opened the bedroom door and crept into the living room. The cabin was quiet. We opened the front door together. The porch was empty. No footprints. Nothing. Just the wet wood of the porch, glistening in the light. Bear walked out first, cautiously sniffing the air, his ears still low. But he didn't bark. He didn't growl. It was like whatever had been there was gone. We packed up that morning and left. Later, back home, I started researching. I needed to know we weren't crazy. That's when I found them. The black-eyed children. People all over the country have seen them on doorsteps, outside cars, on back roads. Some people say they're ghosts. Others think they're demons. Or aliens. Or something older. I don't know what they are. I don't want to know. We never went camping there. And just after a year later, Bear died a few years ago. He was old, but I think part of him never recovered from that night. Back in the summer of 1990, when the world still seemed a little less crowded and a whole lot wilder, my name's Thomas Rayford, Tommy Ray, to most folks who knew me back then, and what I'm about to tell you is real. I don't expect everyone to believe me, and I haven't spoken much about it. That summer, I was just a man trying to get away from it all. You know how it is. Life stacks up on you stress, a broken heart, the creeping sense you've wasted too many years doing the wrong things. So I did what I always did when things got too heavy. I packed a bag, laced up my boots, and headed for the mountains. My destination was a patch of woods in western North Carolina. The locals call it Castle Rock, on account of this strange ridge that juts up from the trees like a ruined fortress. You won't find it on most maps, and even the older locals talk about it in that half-joking way, like they're not sure if it's real or if they dreamed it. I'd heard about it from a friend who swore he once camped nearby and never got a full night's sleep because the forest sounded wrong. That's how he put it, like it was breathing. I figured that was just some late-night paranoia. I wanted solitude, so I drove as far as the roads would take me, then hiked 2 days into the thickest woods I'd ever seen. By the time I made it to the base of that rock formation, I could hardly hear anything at all. No birds, no wind, not even bugs. I picked a clearing at the edge of the ridge to set up camp. It was a strange little hollow, ringed by black locust trees, the ground dry and bare like nothing wanted to grow there. I should have taken that as a sign, but I was tired and proud of how far I'd made it, so I dropped my pack, pulled out my little folding shovel, and started digging a trench for my fire pit. That's when I hit something solid. I thought it was just a stone, but it didn't scrape like rock. It had a dull, hollow resistance to it. I knelt down and started brushing away the dirt, figuring maybe I'd found a chunk of old wood or something. But it wasn't wood. It was bone. A long, pale curve of it. Smooth, solid, and bigger than it had any right to be. My first thought was maybe it was a bear or some kind of large animal. But the more I uncovered, the less sense that made. The shape wasn't right. The angles, the proportions they looked. Human, and not just human. Enormous. I spent the next hour scraping away at the soil, uncovering 3 more pieces. What I later learned were a humerus. I had no training in anatomy, but you don't need to be a doctor to recognize a leg bone. What I couldn't recognize was the scale. These things were massive, each one easily twice the length and thickness of what you'd expect from a grown man. I remember sitting back on my heels, staring at the bones in the fading light, and thinking, this can't be real. No human could be that size. It wasn't possible, but there they were, heavy and solid under my hands, real as the dirt they came from. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my cold fire pit, flashlight in hand, bones wrapped in my extra tarp, and listened to the forest. Still no sounds. Just this pressing silence that felt unnatural. Around 3 a.m, I swore I felt the ground vibrate beneath me, just for a second. A low, almost imperceptible tremor, like something shifting deep below. When dawn broke, I packed the bones as carefully as I could and hiked back the way I came. It took me longer going down. The whole time, I felt watched not by animals, but by something older and bigger than anything I could name. I made it to my truck, threw the bones in the back, and didn't stop driving until I reached my town. I didn't want to tell anyone at first. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. And I took the bones to a university where I knew someone in the anthropology department. I told them I'd found them while hiking and left out the details. They were intrigued, even excited at first. They took some tests, took some photos, measured everything. That's when things got weird. One of the professors, a guy named Dr. Kenner, pulled me aside after the first week. I'll never forget the look on his face. He was pale, like he'd just seen something he couldn't unsee. These bones, he said, they're human. Structurally, yes. But the proportions are wrong. The density is too high. In the jaw fragment, we think it might be pathological, but it doesn't match any known deformity. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying we don't know what they are. A long, pale curve of it. Smooth, solid, and bigger than it had any right to be. My first thought was maybe it was a bear or some kind of large animal. But the more I uncovered, the less sense that made. The shape wasn't right. The angles, the proportions they looked. Human, and not just human. Enormous. I spent the next hour scraping away at the soil, uncovering 3 more pieces. What I later learned were a humerus. I had no training in anatomy, but you don't need to be a doctor to recognize a leg bone. What I couldn't recognize was the scale. These things were massive, each one easily twice the length and thickness of what you'd expect from a grown man. I remember sitting back on my heels, staring at the bones in the fading light, and thinking, this can't be real. No human could be that size. It wasn't possible, But there they were, heavy and solid under my hands, real as the dirt they came from. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my cold fire pit, flashlight in hand, bones wrapped in my extra tarp, and listened to the forest. Still no sounds. Just this pressing silence that felt unnatural. Around 3 a.m, I swore I felt the ground vibrate beneath me, just for a second. A low, almost imperceptible tremor, like something shifting deep below. When dawn broke, I packed the bones as carefully as I could and hiked back the way I came. It took me longer going down. The whole time, I felt watched not by animals, but by something older and bigger than anything I could name. I made it to my truck, threw the bones in the back, and didn't stop driving until I reached my town. I didn't want to tell anyone at first. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. And I took the bones to a university where I knew someone in the anthropology department. I told them I'd found them while hiking and left out the details. They were intrigued, even excited at first. They took some tests, took some photos, measured everything. That's when things got weird. One of the professors, a guy named Dr. Kenner, pulled me aside after the first week. I'll never forget the look on his face. He was pale, like he'd just seen something he couldn't unsee. These bones, he said, they're human. Structurally, yes. But the proportions are wrong. The density is too high. And the jaw fragment, we think it might be pathological, but it doesn't match any known deformity. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying we don't know what they are. A few days later, they stopped receiving my calls. I tried pressing, but they shut me down. Said the bones were reassigned for further study and that I didn't need to worry about it. One secretary told me, off the record, that someone from a federal agency had come and taken everything. I went back to the place a year later. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself it had really happened. Maybe I just wanted closure. But the place had changed. The clearing was overgrown, like the earth had swallowed the site whole again. And the silence. It was worse. Not just quiet, but heavy. And I swear I heard the heavy sound. A deep, distant thump, like a footstep from something that weighed several tons, coming from underground. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. The locals won't talk about it. The few I've asked get quiet real fast or change the subject. I think about those bones sometimes. About what or who they belonged to. What if there were others before us taller, stronger, older? What if they're still here, buried deep in the earth? You seriously won't believe this story, but I swear it really happened, and it goes back to 1992. I was just a kid, maybe 15 or 16, living in a small town near the Appalachian Mountains. That night, my friends and I thought we were just going on a harmless camping trip. But what happened? What we stumbled into is something I can never forget. And I can't shake the fear, even now, years later. It started like any other summer evening. We had heard from the older kids and locals that the forest area around the old swamp had been closed off after dark. The signs were clear: keep out, danger, unstable terrain, no trespassing. But we were young. My closest friends were with me. We decided to ignore the signs and sneak past the rusted fence after dark to find the old camping spot. The fence had a gap where the metal had corroded over time. We slipped through silently, adrenaline already rushing through my veins. The swamp was darker than I expected, darker than anything I'd ever seen. Almost immediately, I noticed something strange. Faint, distant bells jingling somewhere deeper in the swamp. We thought it was some kind of wildlife. But then the sound grew louder, soft, high-pitched jingling, like tiny bells tied to someone's clothing. We froze. The air grew colder, despite the summer heat. Our flashlights barely pierced the gloom, and the swamp around us seemed to close in tighter. And then I saw them. Small, humanoid figures darting among the treetops. I blinked, but they were real. Tiny, bearded creatures with wrinkled faces, dressed in colorful patchwork clothes that shimmered in the dark. Their caps had large baubles that bounced with every movement. They moved swiftly and silently between the branches, almost too fast to follow. I wanted to laugh, thinking it was some elaborate prank. But the look in their eyes, dark, gleaming, almost mischievous, made my skin crawl. It was like staring into the eyes of creatures that didn't belong in this world. Before we could say anything, those strange little beings dropped from the treetops and started running toward us. And when I say running, I mean they were moving at a terrifying speed between 40 and 50 miles per hour. It was unnatural, almost inhuman. Their laughter filled the swamp high-pitched. Panic set in like a wave. We turned and ran, our boots sinking into the thick, muddy ground as we struggled to escape. The swamp was alive beneath us, sticky mud pulling at our feet, roots twisting like serpents trying to trip us up. Every step, oh my God, every step was a battle. I could hear the little creatures closing in behind us, their haunting laughter echoing louder and louder. I dared not look back, terrified of what I might see. Our friends, Jenny stumbled, and Carl tried to grab her, but both of them fell headfirst into the muck. I screamed for them to get up, but the swamp was swallowing them whole. I looked back again, just enough to see those tiny creatures almost upon them, their bobbled caps bobbing with sickening speed. I forced myself to keep running, even as my heart pounded in my chest and my lungs burned. I didn't care where I was going, just as far away as possible. The swamp finally gave way to drier ground. We didn't stop running until we reached a small road miles away. We were all shaking, drenched in sweat and mud, barely able to catch our breath. Jenny and Carl finally pulled themselves free, bruised and filthy, but alive. We hugged each other tightly, tears mixing with the grime on our faces. Eventually, some of us talked to the local media. Our stories matched in terrifying detail, though none of us had spoken to each other before the interviews. That's what made it so chilling. Our memories lined up perfectly. It wasn't a shared hallucination or a prank. Something strange and ancient lurked in that swamp. The town called it a local legend, but to me, it was far too real. I don't know what those creatures were, some kind of face, sprites, or something worse.